There are moments in life that strike without warning. No gradual build-up, no signs to prepare you. Just a single instant where everything shifts, tilting the world you thought you understood. 1 second, everything is normal. The next, you're breathless, unsteady, caught in something you never saw coming. That night, I believed I was just being kind. I thought I was doing the right thing. I had no idea I was stepping into something far more complicated than I was ready for. Started with a phone call. The house was dark, the silence thick. I had been getting ready for bed, the weight of the day pressing down on me. My eyelids were heavy, my body exhausted. And then my phone buzzed. I frowned and glanced at the screen. His name was there, glowing in the dim light. My stepson. I hesitated. It was late. Too late for a casual conversation. And lately things had felt different between us. Subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that I had tried to ignore. The way his gaze lingered a second too long. The softness in his voice when he spoke to me. I had told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it. But now, staring at his name on my screen, a strange unease curled in my stomach. Answered. "Hello. Can I come over?" His voice was quiet, tense. I straightened, my brows knitting together. "What's wrong?" Breath. I need to talk to you." The hesitation in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. I should have told him no. I should have said it was late, that whatever it was could wait until morning. But there was something in his tone, something raw, almost desperate, that made it impossible to turn him away. So I spoke the words that would change everything. "Come over." 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, he stood there, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. His expression shadowed by something I couldn't name. He stepped inside without a word. The warmth of the house wrapped around him, but he still looked cold. His jaw was tight, his movements stiff. I shut the door behind him, my pulse quickening. "Tell me what's wrong." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward me, studying me in a way that made my breath catch. I didn't know where else to go. Such a simple sentence, yet the weight of it settled deep in my chest. I nodded, stepping closer. "You can always come to me." Something flickered in his eyes, something unreadable. Then, before I could react, he exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "I need to tell you something, but I don't know how." The air between us grew heavier, charged with something I couldn't define. A slow, twisting tension coiled in my stomach. "You can tell me anything." A humorless laugh slipped past his lips as he shook his head. "No, I really can't." His voice was strained, filled with something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs. I swallowed hard. "Try me." He hesitated. Then finally, his gaze met mine, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I think about you more than I should." The words hit me like a blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Had been right. Something had changed. And now there was no going back. His confession lingered in the air between us, thick and suffocating. A single sentence had shattered the fragile sense of normalcy we had built, breaking apart everything I thought I knew. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse hammering so loudly I could barely process what had just happened. I should have responded. I should have stopped this before it went any further. But my body wouldn't move. My voice refused to work. I was trapped in that moment, staring at him, searching for some sign that this was a mistake, that he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But there was no hesitation in his gaze. No regret. "You don't mean that," I finally managed, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. "I do." His response was immediate. "Certain." And that terrified me more than anything. I took a slow, deliberate step back, needing distance, needing to clear my head. This isn't right. You're just confused. You're going through something, and I'm not confused." His voice was calm, but there was an urgency beneath it, something raw, something unshakable. And in that moment I realized the truth. This had never just been in my imagination. This had been real all along. I shook my head, gripping the edge of the counter behind me as if it could somehow steady me. "We can't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This conversation, whatever this is, it has to stop." His gaze didn't waver. "Then tell me to leave." The quiet challenge in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because I knew if I told him to go, he would. He would walk away and maybe, just maybe, we could pretend this never happened. But why was it so hard to say it? He stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking. The space I had so desperately tried to create slipped through my fingers. I could feel the warmth of his presence, the quiet intensity radiating from him. "Tell me you've never thought about it too." My breath caught. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to look away. "It doesn't matter," I whispered. "It does to me." His voice was softer now, almost pleading. A fresh wave of unease twisted deep in my stomach. I turned away, squeezing my eyes shut, willing myself to regain control. "I think you should go." A long, heavy silence followed. If that's what you really want." He didn't sound convinced. I kept my back to him, listening as he let out a slow breath. And then, finally, I heard the sound of his footsteps retreating. The door creaked open. "Good night." The door clicked shut. Just like that, he was gone. But the moment didn't leave with him. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my body tense, my thoughts tangled. I replayed it all over and over. The way he looked at me, the way his voice had sounded, the words that refused to fade from my mind. "Tell me you've never thought about it too." I hated how much those words haunted me. Hated that a part of me couldn't forget them. I convinced myself that morning would fix everything. That daylight would erase the tension. That the lines we had blurred could be drawn back where they belonged. That we could pretend none of it had ever happened. But I was wrong. Because when I stepped into the kitchen the next morning, he was already there. Sitting at the table, coffee in hand, looking calm, looking normal, looking like nothing had changed. But it had. I hesitated in the doorway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He glanced up, meeting my gaze. "Morning." Single word. Spoken so casually, as if last night hadn't happened at all. As if this was just another morning. I forced a small, tense smile. "Morning." Moving toward the counter, I poured myself coffee, focusing on anything but the weight of his stare. Silence stretched between us, thick and unbearable. And then, "Are we going to talk about it?" I gripped the coffee mug tighter, keeping my back to him. "No." "You're still thinking about it." I swallowed hard, staring at the dark liquid in my cup. "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." His words from last night echoed in my mind, making my chest tighten. I turned, finally meeting his gaze. "You need to stop." "I can't." His voice was quieter now, but no less certain. I shook my head, gripping the counter behind me for support. "We don't have a choice." "I think we do." He stood slowly, watching me, waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. For me to break. For me to run. For me to tell him what he wanted to hear. I did none of those things. Instead, I took a deep breath, setting my coffee down with a quiet clink against the counter. "This ends now." Silence. "If that's what you want." It wasn't a challenge this time. It was something else. Something unreadable. I turned, walking away before I could second-guess myself. Before I could make a mistake I could never take back. I made it to the hallway before I stopped, pressing my hands against the wall, exhaling shakily. I had done the right thing. I knew I had. But then why did it feel like something between us had only just begun?